Chef might be the most undervalued character on TV, full stop. Because let's face it, it's been over 18 years now since his last appearance on South Park, and I haven't heard a goddamn thing about him since. That means Chef has been absent for over 2/3 of the show's existence, despite the fact that he's still canonically alive as the Darth Vader equivalent of a child. And yes, I know, Isaac Hayes is dead, and even before he died, Scientology had already killed him on the inside. But if Rick and Morty can replace the voices of their two main characters, then I don't see why Trey and Matt can't find the new Chef. Because as a based Chef enjoyer, I think what hurts me the most is how people seem to have forgotten just how important Chef really was to the show in those first 9 years. Not only was he a staple character and one of the most prominently featured adults on South Park, but he was also consistently funny, accompanied by iconic side characters, and his balls were salty.
Put 'em in your mouth and suck 'em and suck 'em.
Now look, I'm not trying to be one of those people who advocates for the show to go backwards and relive its classic seasons, because I think that's stupid. The show has evolved over the years, and I would rather get a fresh take on South Park that Trey and Matt are excited about than some desperate attempt to cling on to what was. But I think that what makes Chef so undervalued is that people don't really appreciate what he would bring to the show if he was still on it today. And the easiest way to see that is by looking at what the show has been missing since his departure. So, in typical me fashion, I'm gonna break this bad boy up into 3 sections, each one representing an element that has been missing since Chef left the show. And if there's time at the end, who knows, I might even plug my Discord server, link in description. But we'll talk about that later. For now, let's get into why South Park needs to bring back Chef. When it comes to the kids at South Park, the show has always been a bit of a balancing act. On the one hand, the 4 boys act like regular kids. They're naive, imaginative, and generally unaware of how the world works. They'll do stuff like build a ladder to heaven because they think it'll let them talk to a dead Kenny. Or they'll shoot at actual criminals with finger guns because to them, they're just playing detective.
It doesn't go PQ, it goes bang, bang, bang.
But at the same time, the kids are also often used as a voice of reason, usually when the adults are all acting like a bunch of crazy people, but also when Trey and Matt want to criticize something. Like the hundreds of times that Kyle has learned something today at the end of an episode, or the many times that Stan harshly tells it like it is.
I said you should yourself? What you do is sort of unjustifiable? And you know it's unjustifiable? You're the definition of evil? Yourself?
But the problem with having the kids occupy both positions is that it puts too much of a limit on how much they can do. In order to maintain their childlike naivety, they can only say so much about a given situation. And that limitation factor only increases as the subject matter skews to more adult topics. Like for example, if South Park did an episode criticizing something sexual, would you really want Kyle to be the voice of reason there? Wouldn't that feel kinda off? That's why for certain situations, it makes a lot more sense when the takeaway comes from an adult character. But the adults in South Park, as I just said 10 seconds ago, are kind of retarded. So usually, the only logical adults we get to see these days are the more wet blanket style characters like Sharon or Sheila. You see where I'm going with this? You see this argument I'm making here? Once upon a time, there was a likable adult character that didn't have brain damage, and that character was Chef. For the majority of the first 8 to 9 seasons, Chef was the adult character that acted as a voice of reason, and that allowed the show to approach different topics from different angles. For example, in the sex education episode, Chef was the one that convinced the parents to explain things to their kids instead of relying on the school to do it for them. And that made sense as a role for him because the topic was too mature for one of the boys to say it in his place. And sure, technically they could have gotten one of the other adults to do it, like Mr. Garrison, but in order to use the other adult characters in that way, they would have to break their already established personalities. And in that episode, Mr. Garrison's established personality led to him doing some depraved shit in front of the preschool class.
First of all, you remove the condom from its package. Put it in your mouth and apply.
Yeah, I don't know how they got away with putting that in their show. Anyways, that's why Chef works so well as a voice of reason. He's like the adult reflection of Stan and Kyle. When people are acting crazy and the kids are noticing something's up, Chef is usually the only other character that understands what they're talking about. A great example would be in the episode Death Camp of Tolerance. God, I clearly like talking about this episode a lot. The boys all think Mr. Garrison is acting like a deviant pervert, but everyone else just thinks that the boys are being intolerant and homophobic. Everyone else but Chef. And so after the kids tell him about their issues with Mr. Garrison, the first thing he does is bring it up with the principal, only to get immediately rejected like the boys.
No, we're sending Chef to a tolerance seminar.
Sending Chef to a tolerance seminar? You got to be crazy.
And of course, by having an adult character fall victim to the same issues that the boys are having, that adds an extra layer of comedy to the situation. Because now, it's not just the kids who think something's wrong, it's the whole town that's acting crazy, which emphasizes the ridiculousness of the situation. Without Chef, they lose that angle of attack, which is still funny, don't get me wrong, but it's not as funny as it could be. Because by having a level-headed adult character that understands the kids, it gives them someone to turn to in their times of need, like in the season 7 episode Cancelled, where Chef was the only other person that seemed to notice they were stuck in a repeat.
I've been feeling deja vu all morning, children. I knew something strange was going on.
The very fact that Chef was given a level of awareness that is usually just reserved for the 4 boys speaks to the importance of his role in the show. He's essentially a conduit for the kids to check in with reality. He's like the parent that they would have if the other adults weren't so stupid. When the kids ask about drugs, he tells them to wait until college. When Stan wants to know how to make a woman like him, he tells him to find the clitoris. And when he thinks that the kids have accidentally and murdered their teacher, he helps them without question.
All right, children, I got you 4 tickets to Thailand and $300 cash. It's gonna be tough living for a while. You might have to do some things for money you never thought of doing before.
Truly a bro if I've ever seen one. And yeah, his advice wasn't always the best, but at least he was willing to broach topics with the kids that the other adults wouldn't. He was a unique voice of reason that approached the issues at hand from a different perspective than the kids. And that created more opportunities for comedy and storytelling that have kind of vanished in modern South Park, which is really what this all comes down to. Losing Chef meant losing potential that the show never fully recovered. Yeah, apparently I'm just calling this section black. Am I being racist, edgy, lazy? I don't know, stay tuned and find out. But yeah, I think this section kind of speaks for itself because realistically, I can sum this whole part up with just one question, which is, who are the black characters in South Park? I mean, technically the answer is simple. Nicole, Token, his parents. But if you take a moment and actually think about it for a second, you might notice something funny about these characters. And that's the fact that they're all whitewashed as hell. Yeah, pretty much every black character in South Park right now acts like they're white, which is fine, don't get me wrong. But what if I want to hear from the perspective of someone that's more connected to black culture? Who am I supposed to turn to then? Incredibly obese black man?
Excuse me, I'm not incredibly obese black man. I'm incredibly black obese man.
Oh, my bad. Usually I wouldn't care so much about something like that, but since South Park is a topical show that often focuses on social commentary, it feels like a giant missed opportunity that all of their black characters act white. But it wasn't always like that, because they used to have Chef. And at the time, Chef was utilized in the exact way I'm talking about. When the topic of cultural appropriation came up, Chef was the one that put things into perspective. When the US Army is being unabashedly racist, Chef is the one who stands up to them.
Have you ever heard of the Emancipation Proclamation?
I don't listen to hip-hop.
The point is that Chef was the perfect stand-in to discuss topics that might otherwise not be an obvious fit for the show anymore. And it feels like with his absence, the show has backed away from those topics more than it would have in the past. For example, I'd personally be interested in hearing Chef's take on stuff like Black Lives Matter, affirmative action, or whatever. So it's kind of sad that he isn't around for stuff like that anymore, because I think that black culture has become more mainstream today than it ever was before. And that means that having a voice for it in the show is more relevant today than it ever has been. Now, luckily, because Trey and Matt are such gods of social commentary, they actually managed to cover some modern topics back when they did still have Chef on the show, like in the season 4 episode, Chef Goes Nanners. In that episode, Chef is protesting to change South Park's incredibly racist flag. And because some of the townsfolk are either against the change or completely ambivalent to the flag in general, Chef gets progressively more upset. And eventually, this leads to him adopting an anti-white attitude out of anger for the lack of sympathy that his cause has gotten, which includes him lashing out at a confused Stan and Kyle. But when he realizes that the boys, and most of the other townsfolk, aren't actually coming at the issue from a place of racism, he has an epiphany.
But now I realize that I almost let racism turn me into a racist.
We've been way too divisive over this, Chef. Maybe we can come up with a compromise flag.
I think that's a much better start than me trying to separate myself from all you wonderful crackers.
I mean, goddamn, that's pretty relevant to today, don't you think? A speech about how focusing on race too much only leads to more racism kinda sounds like a critique of intersectionality, which means I probably should have put this in my South Park future predictions video. Now, to be fair, in the era after Chef left, the show has used Token and his family to discuss somewhat similar topics. There is the infamous N-word episode where Token helps Stan realize that he's incapable of fully empathizing with the black experience. And there's also the Big Fix, where Randy uses his newfound friendship with Steve to deflect criticisms of being racist. But even with those examples, I can't help but feel that the show is once again being limited by the absence of Chef, and that ever since he left, the show has lost a part of its voice that it never got back. Okay, alright, you got me. This section is a little bit more subjective than the other sections. I just wanted to get my opinion in here. I think that's fair, right? We're like 10 pages into my script at this point. I think I've earned a little moment for this. The theme of this section is simple. It's comedy. Specifically, it's about how Chef once brought a unique brand of comedy to the show that isn't really there anymore. And while it's true that South Park has an overall style of humor that it goes for, it also has characters that bring their own style to any given episode. I think the most obvious example right now would be Randy. When Randy is on the screen, you know that you'll be getting some mixture of party bro with stubbornness and pretension. Basically, all of Randy's roles in the last couple of decades involve him drinking, acting like he knows more than he does, and stubbornly clinging onto his ideas because he doesn't want to admit that he's wrong. He wants to come off as knowledgeable and wise, despite the fact that he's mostly an idiot. And the same goes for Cartman. When Cartman is on screen, you know that you'll be hearing some evil, manipulative, lazy, fat type shit. And that's why we love him. But there are only so many characters on South Park that have their own trademark brand of comedy like that, and the one that we never get to see anymore is Chef. Chef's brand of comedy usually revolved around sex and being the only real educator to the four boys. You can pretty much assume that when he wasn't on screen, he was busy getting busy with a few girls simultaneously.
You and me and her, simultaneous loving, baby. 2 or 3.
You gotta admit, it's pretty catchy. But now that I've said all that, I want you to forget about the basic ass facts and evidence that I vaguely brought to the table just now, because it's time to go straight into my opinion. And that opinion is that I think the Chef brand of comedy is hilarious. I love the ridiculous advice he gives when the kids ask him about anything. I love how his advice always ends up being sexual, even when the kids aren't asking about girls. I like how even as a kid, Chef still had the exact same traits that he does now as an adult.
Come on, kid, don't you want to get high?
Hey, man, I don't need dope. Let me sing you a little song. I can't wait until I grow up and my weenie gets big and strong. Cause when it does, I'm gonna buzz and make love to your man all night long. I'm gonna make love to your man in about 10 years.
What? What the hell is he talking about?
And this toothpick is gonna turn into an oak tree.
And that's not even getting into the holy grail of Chef-related comedy. Yeah, I'm talking about the crown jewel here, Chef's parents. All part of the amazing package deal you get when you purchase Chef today for the low price of $3.50. I honestly think that Chef's parents are among the highest tier of side characters in the whole show. That whole Loch Ness Monster bit has become iconic and one of the most memorable jokes for people in all of South Park. And their later inclusion in episodes like The Biggest Douche in the Universe have lines that I still quote to this day.
All right, son, now bring me the victim child. The victim child?
Oh, Lord, they didn't bring a victim child.
So you see, bringing back Chef would be worth it just to get his parents on the show again. And I'm dying on that hill. I don't care what anyone has to say. I find that funny. And sure, I'll be the first to admit it, of all the reasons I brought up for bringing Chef back, these points are probably the weakest. But for me, I personally feel like South Park would benefit from bringing his comedy style back into the picture. Besides, where else are you gonna hear someone sing a song about prostitutes to a bunch of clueless 9-year-old kids?
But that's not why you pay a prostitute. No, you don't pay for her to stay. You pay her to leave afterward. That's why I praise the Lord for prostitutes.
What's that? I said I'd be dividing this video up into 3 sections, but now there's suddenly a 4th? Yeah, well, it's my video, I could do whatever I want. And yes, that includes surrounding myself with a bunch of girls in bikinis. It's my channel, that's how I roll. I do random shit like tease a Paul McCartney video that I'll eventually make, as a way of hinting to people that this is not a South Park channel, just like I told the Weezer fans. Anyways, now that we've gotten all my amazing arguments out of the way for why Chef should return, let's take a moment to talk about how he could return. Because the way I see it, they can go in one of 2 directions here. They can do what they did when they killed off Kenny, and just have Chef randomly walk onto the screen and say something like, "I was just standing over there."
Hey guys, what's going on? Oh, hey Kenny. Dude, where have you been?
Or, and this is my preferred direction, they could do a whole special about it. A special that uses Darth Chef for a story where the boys can help him become human again. Now, I'm no Trey Parker, so I won't act like I can come up with something as good as he would, but I can easily imagine it being a continuation of the Super Adventure Club storyline. You know, maybe the club has been traveling around the world, making love to children's everywhere they go, and Darth Chef has become like their evil leader, and it's up to the boys to stop him and turn him back into the old Chef that we know and love. Something like that, maybe, I don't know. But don't tell me that they can't restore Chef's body just because he got burnt, shot, impaled, and mauled by a grizzly bear and mountain lion. Because we just had Randy and the boys face off against a bunch of cereal mascots, so I think it's fair to say that the show doesn't have to be realistic. I don't know, maybe it's not the perfect way to go about it, but like I said, I'm not Trey Parker. I just think that Chef is an amazing character that has gone underused in a show that could seriously benefit from bringing him back. And I think it's a topic worth bringing up today, since we now have precedents for cartoon shows replacing important voices. So that's why I decided to make this video, because Chef was once an iconic piece of South Park that everybody loved, and personally, I think he still has more to give. So until we get to see that old familiar face on the show again, he will always be one of the most undervalued characters on TV. Plus, he's got chocolate salty balls.
Suck on my chocolate salty balls. Put 'em in your mouth. Put 'em in your mouth and suck 'em and suck 'em.